Hey, City Transformers. Thank you so much for your patience this week as I kind of navigated some technical difficulties with Facebook. What actually happened was I did the live, it said it was live. I did the whole thing only to find out that there was going to be a glitch and it didn't actually get posted onto my page. So I apologize, but I want to make sure that I shared this video with you because today I'm going to be talking about what does city transformation look like? Over and over I've said that in city transformation looks like individual transformation. But how do we even approach helping people do that, right? Because we don't want to focus on behavioral modification. We want them to experience Jesus so that they can um, transform from the inside out, right? But what does that even look like, and how do we get there? And I want to mention too, if you are a member of my Facebook group, Move by Compassion Community, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for saying, yes, I'm in. I want to understand what this is all about. I want to be a part of this. I believe in it because I believe that you are trailblazers, that you are people that are being called out by God in order to start to be a spark that's going to light a wildfire of the gospel in our communities. And I believe that if we as the church can come together, if we all can sort of pick up our torch and, take responsibility for this, I believe that we can actually bring real change to our communities. And if we do that and God is on our side, there's nothing that can stop us. In fact, the church used to be at the forefront of this work, right? And so it was the church that developed orphanages and soup kitchens and even hospitals. But over the years, our responsibility or that responsibility has been turned over to government agencies and healthcare organizations. And many of those organizations do a lot of really great work. And so I'm very thankful for them. And I'm thankful for medicine and services that are in place for people. But the secular agencies are missing the most important piece, which is Jesus. And so today I want to help bridge the gap between how the world views these societal issues with how we, the body of Christ, should view these issues with how the world does. And so that's because I believe that we are moving into the age of the kingdom and and away from the age of the church. And by that, I mean, we're moving away from this culture of I show up on Sunday, I show up on Wednesday, and I check the box, and that's about as um, you know, deep as I go. That's about as far as I'm going to get. I'm just going to church and I'm doing what I need to do, and that's it. But God is calling for people to be more engaged. He wants people to participate in his plan, and his plan is to build his kingdom here on earth. And in order for us to move into the age of kingdom, into the age of the kingdom, Jesus needs to see that he has a kingdom here on earth, right? And that means that his church is unified and is fulfilling his mission on earth. And that mission is to share the good news. It's to save the world. It's to set the oppressed free, to set the prisoners free. And so that word saved in the Greek, in the Bible, it's sozo, and it means to bring redemption, but also to heal, to restore, and to make well. And as sons and daughters of God, he does that through us. He's given us the ministry of reconciliation because all things have already been reconciled to him. So it's our job to bring other people into that reconciliation with us. And Jesus is the Prince of Peace, right? Well, that word peace, shalom in Hebrew, means nothing missing, nothing broken. Yet it doesn't take us long to take a look around and to see that there is a lot of brokenness in our world. So I want to give you some examples. This is going to be a little bit different of a teaching. It's going to be a little technical, I guess, but I have a background in public health. I have worked in the healthcare industry for a really long time. And so I wanted to share with you some data that is pretty telling as to why there should be urgency around city transformation. Okay, so I am going to share my screen here. And we're going to get started. Okay, slide 1. So this is a slide, this is a graph of the rates of something that researchers call deaths of despair. These are deaths that are caused by suicide, drugs, or alcohol. So you can see that each, the blue, the black, and the green are all of those things broken out, but the gray one is the total of all those deaths over a 100-year period, more than 100 years. And so these deaths, again, are caused by suicide, drugs, and alcohol. These deaths have been increasing over the last 5 decades. But now they've reached such a high prevalence that they have actually caused the life expectancy in the United States to decrease. People committing suicide has decreased the life expectancy in the United States. I just want that to sink in for a minute. It's not heart disease, not cancer, suicide. And so many might think that the underlying cause of these deaths are, loss of job or isolation, loss of financial stability, and all those things are contributing factors. But the real root cause of these deaths is a lack of identity. And if it's this thought of, if I'm not a provider for my family, if I'm not an executive, if I don't have this status, if I don't have these cars, then I'm nothing, which is really sad. And so, let me go to the next slide. So this is another map, but with the onset of COVID-19, researchers estimated that the prevalence of these deaths are only going to increase. It's difficult to see on this map, but it shows that Michigan, for example, where I live, is going to see nearly 60 deaths of despair per 100,000. And so, in fact, the Wellbeing Trust reports that for every 1 percentage point increase in unemployment, we can estimate the number of deaths of despair will increase by 1.6%. So you can see here, by this legend here, those different squares correlate to how many per 100,000 people pass away from a death of despair. Okay. So next I want to talk about something called adverse childhood events. These are data from Michigan where I live. I'm just going to try to bring it down real, I've done this research for where I live, so I'm going to share it with you, but all of this is available for where you live too. And I'll share some of the links where you can go and look at those things. This, for example, is data that I found on our state website. All of this is publicly available to you through your Department of Health and Human Services or Community Health Department, whatever it is called. So this shows that in Michigan, it shows that 20 to 40% of children experience some sort of adverse event. And so these are things like a parent who's mentally ill or divorced, or maybe a parent who was incarcerated. And the most prevalent of the ACEs is verbal abuse and living with someone who has substance abuse, which could tie back to deaths of despair, right? And so kids that have high ACEs scores are more likely to be incarcerated, live in poverty, have chronic disease, and experience mental illness, struggle in school, difficulty holding on to jobs, all kinds of things, right? And so the root cause of these issues is the breakdown of the family unit. Generations of abuse and dysfunction that have been passed on and on and on and on. And it's a vicious cycle. Yet there's so much judgment towards those who are poor or undereducated, but in actuality, they're simply a product of their environment. And research shows us that it only takes making a change in one generation to stop the cycle. Okay, so here's some more information about my community where I live, but I wanted to show this slide because I wanted to mention that every few years, hospitals and community health agencies everywhere, every state, every community, they do a rigorous evaluation of health in your community. So you can go look that up. And here are some of the findings where I live. And this is, I hope that I don't get emotional when I talk about it because it's incredibly sad. 39% of youth in my community reported that they felt sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks or more in a row so that they stopped doing some unusual activities during the past 12 months. Whoops, I'm sorry. 23% of youth seriously considered attempting suicide during the past 12 months, and 10% of youth attempted suicide. When we think about a pandemic and we see that almost 40% of our kids are depressed and contemplating, and 20% are contemplating suicide, I feel like that should be a wake-up call to us. And we're seeing the effects of that right through these deaths of despair, through high rates of substance abuse, crime, um, you know, mental health issues, anxiety, all of these things are going up. And they're not going to get better unless we do something. And I wholeheartedly believe that the church is the answer to all of these problems, because it is only through Jesus that people can experience redemption in all areas of their life. And so I'm going to move on. Over 30% of adults reported having some type of heart disease, which is a disease caused by stress and poor diet, but mostly stress. And 10% of the residents living in my community, 13% of kids, experience or live in poverty. And so that doesn't even count those who are just above the poverty line, who maybe aren't considered in poverty, but they really don't have enough to live on. And so in my community, the 4 priorities that they outlined were chronic disease, such as like obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease, substance abuse, mental health, and social conditions such as food insecurity, job stability, and transportation. And I'd also add housing, which I know that many different places experience that. And so you may be wondering, okay, Jamie, you're showing us all this data. Why are you showing us this? And so I want to move on to this. And these are something called social determinants of health. And, as I've just shown, just very briefly, there are a lot of problems in our world, in our nation, and in our local communities. And it can feel really overwhelming to think about, where do we even begin to address these issues? And all of these problems are actually rooted in things that we can impact as a church. These social determinants of health are all the things that researchers have said are needed in order to have a healthy community. And when these things are not in place, we see a higher mortality or rate of death. It also is the cause for our healthcare crisis and why people suffer. I think I've mentioned this on our Facebook page or our group before. I think I posted a link a while back about our zip code. Where you live literally predicts how long you will live. It can vary based on your neighborhood. So I want to talk about, like, for example, in Washington, D.C., people living in a neighborhood called Berry Farms, they have a life expectancy of 63.2 years. But just less than 10 miles away, in a neighborhood in Friendship Heights and Friendship Village, the people that live there can expect to live 96.1 years. And this is according to CDC data. That's a difference of 30 years of life expectancy in just 10 miles. You lose 3 years of life for every mile that you travel between those two neighborhoods. So when I heard that, when I heard those statistics, I was at a healthcare conference, and immediately the verse John 10:10 came to my mind, and that is, the thief comes only to steal, slaughter, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly. This is not life in abundance. This is a product of the kingdom not being built in our local communities. In fact, we want to think about the healthcare system and the healthcare crisis, and we're all trying to figure that out. But 80% of a person's health actually depends on things that are outside of the healthcare system, outside of the doctor's office. And the underlying problem for not having these things in place is poverty. So if we don't solve the issue of poverty, whether that be financial poverty, spiritual poverty, whatever it is, people will continue to literally die for things that are most of the time out of their control, like where they live, where they're born, um, access to quality education. All of those things aren't within a person's control. Yet these are things that we can impact because they're all really, really practical. We can help train people and help them find jobs. We can drive them to doctor's appointments. We can support our schools by offering tutoring to at-risk kids. We can have food closets and community gardens, and we can even have safe neighborhoods. Having a healthy community is what I mean by saying we want to see our cities transformed, because our cities are sick. Isn't it time for us to take our rightful place and be the light in the darkness? As Christ's ambassadors, isn't it our responsibility to bring the healing, the sozo, the restoration, the redemption, and the shalom, nothing missing, nothing broken, that it needs? And here's the thing, the world falls short with this list of social determinants, and they have not been able to show drastic change because they fail to include the most important element, because they do not include the healer. The missing link is Jesus. And so when I think about shalom and I think about life in abundance, I think of these 7 pillars of wholeness as described by my friend and mentor, Shalise Jimenez. She is a wonderful lady, has a wonderful book called The Path. But each one of these pillars is a puzzle piece that needs to be put in place so that every person can experience life in abundance. And most importantly, in the middle of this, holding this all together, we need people to be spiritually whole, because Jesus is the fountain that all life flows from. He is the living water that is going to heal our churches, heal our cities, our nation, and our world. And again, poverty, I would even say lack of identity even, is at the root is a spiritual problem. It is a lack of knowing their identity in Christ and their oneness with him, their union with him. In fact, there's many in the church that don't even know that you are one with God, that the power that raised Christ from the dead lives inside of you. There's so many believers that don't even know who they are. And so we need we need a fresh revelation in the church about that. But the world has tried to address all those things. They have tried to address social determinants of health. And we spend dollar after dollar after dollar on programs and research that tells us what we as the church already know, that Jesus is the answer to every single problem. And it's through his church that he fixes all problems. Poverty or a lack of wholeness will never be solved if the church is not intentional about addressing it. And so the dream that God has shown me for the church is that every believer would be moved by compassion, just as Jesus was and is, to help transform the lives of people. We transform cities by helping other people transform. And I know, as I said, that God is raising up leaders just like you to look past the same way that we have done it before, by doing outreach based events that are focused on fun and giveaways and bringing in the numbers, or even just doing community based charitable outreach events several times a year. Those things are not bad, but it's not enough. If we want to see real change, we need to be investing in programs and resources that are more meaningful to communities. The things that could literally transform communities are building relationships with the people who live in them. And when we build a relationship with the people who live in them and we help them walk through the process of wholeness, we're going to see really amazing things happen. And so when I look at this list of social determinants and the pillars of wholeness, I see that these are all things that we can do. But in order to do this, we have to be consistent, we have to be intentional, and we have to be strategic. And so I am going to turn off my slides now. Okay, thank you for hanging with me with that. So if you remember, I talked about ACEs just a minute ago. I grew up, I struggle even saying that I grew up in poverty, because I know that there's always going to be people who had less than I did. And, we had everything that we needed, but we really struggled. It was not uncommon to have utilities shut off, to be at risk of losing our housing. But the thing that kept us on track were the people. That somebody asked my mom to start going to church with her. And then once we got there, then they started doing things like buying us food, or, I had relatives that would take us school shopping, or, we got adopted as kids, that we would have a Christmas or whatever. But through going to our church, not only were our practical needs taken care of, but we as people, as humans, that we were taken care of through relationship. That I had people who were role models that invested in me, that taught me and mentored me. And now I'm not one of the statistics. I graduated from college. I have a good job. I'm an entrepreneur. I wrote a book. I did all of these things, but that was because I had people in my life to encourage me, to root for me and tell me not to give up, to point me to the word. In fact, like most teenagers do, you have like your moments of not being so great to be around. And I remember my grandparents, who were believers, they never yelled at me, they never got angry at me. They would always my grandfather would, he had a Rolodex of Bible verses, and he would just pick one out of the Rolodex, or he would write one down on a piece of paper or a note card, and he would just hand it to me. And so they were always turning me towards the word of God. And that's what gave me life. So when we're helping people in our communities, we should be thinking about these 7 pillars: spiritual, mental, emotional, relational, financial, physical, vocational, and asking, where is this person lacking wholeness? Or rather, you can ask the person, hey, where do you feel like you're lacking wholeness? And then we just need to commit to walking with them, to being in relationship with them, to praying for them, to contending for them until they get there. Okay, so that's how we're going to transform cities. That's what city transformation looks like. It looks like wholeness. So one last thing before I go, I am going to have special guests with me, my dear friends, Pastors Vic and Paula Holtz. When I think about a church being moved by compassion in their community, when I think about a church culture where the members of their church are empowered to be the move in the community themselves as individuals, I picture Vic and Paula's church. And so they're wonderful people. And I am so excited to have them be a part of Facebook, my Facebook Live next Monday. Um, so you don't want to miss it. They're amazing people, and they are just a practical example of what this looks like. And so I hope that you will enjoy listening in. It is next Monday at 7 p.m. And so I will see you there.